give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
To curb corruption, one must be courageous to confront and rise up against the corrupt. Sleep well, be guided by ethics and standards for peace of mind.
Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. LMD, the voice of business.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. The topic of conversation today is inbound travel prospects. And with us we have the Managing Director of the travel sector of Acorn Group, Suranjith De Fonseka. Suranjith, it's very nice to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ruwandi. Thank you for having me.
Before we talk of the prospects of inbound travel, which I want to focus on, I'd like to ask you to give the audience a little bit of foundation about how inbound travel is doing now that the country is coming out of the crisis. How are the numbers?
Well, we ended arrivals in 2023 on just short of 1.5 million arrivals. I think it was something like 1,487,000 to be exact. And that was also a 100% increase from the previous year. Of course, because 2022 with the economic crisis, it really didn't do well in terms of arrivals, and we were still coming out of the pandemic. But what we're seeing in 2024 looks like we're going to come back in 2024 to the way things were prior to the pandemic and prior to Easter Sunday. And I think rightfully Sri Lanka Tourism has set a goal of the arrivals to be close to the 2.4 million mark, which is what we did in 2018. And looking at what the arrivals were in the last couple of months, it looks like we will get there.
Following up on that, what are the source markets like right now? Are those also the same as 2018?
I think there's been one shift if we examine the top 5 markets, and it's that China's not in the top 5 anymore. And I think it's because China is gradually ramping up to in terms of their arrivals and things like that. I think we still have India at number 1. It was the case in 2018. It still is the case. We happen to be on the doorstep to India, and I think that's a great advantage that we have. And the growing middle class in India has a never-ending need to discover new places, and I think it helps that we are so close to India. But number 2 is the new addition that we're having now, and that is Russia. Russia was always in the top 10, but not as high as number 2. And I think that's a big shift that we are seeing in the recent months. And followed by the usual source markets like the UK and Germany coming in at number 3 and number 4. And we've also got in the typical top 10 countries still being there, like Australia, Canada, because countries like that have a pretty large Sri Lankan diaspora that lives there, and of course when they travel, they carry an Australian passport or a Canadian passport, and so they would get counted as a tourist according to the UNWTO definition of a tourist.
Suranjith, so numbers are looking really good from what you're saying. Now talking about the supply side, Sri Lanka has historically had a huge portfolio of things from sun, sand, sea to wildlife to everything. Looking at where we are now, especially because we have different source markets also, are there any novel additions, novel attractions to our offering?
I think the most novel and relatively recent addition that has come on board is the Pico Trail. And it has been extremely well received in the key source markets that we are operating in. And I think it was Nat Geo that went to the extent of saying that the Pico Trail was one of the greatest new additions to a tourism product. I'm not sure whether I'm really phrasing that right, but something on those lines. Something on those lines. And I think that endorsement itself speaks for how great the trail is. And I think post-pandemic, we're seeing more and more travelers wanting to do more quiet and active-based holidays. So where they really enjoy the environment, but at their own pace, and if they want to do it by themselves, they can do it by themselves. And the Pico Trail really fits in there. Another product I think that we've seen, at least in the last couple of months, is a lot of literary and arts festivals coming back.
We had two back to back.
We had 4 events. I'm not sure whether you are aware of them. I mean, the Gaul Lit Festival made a comeback in 2024, which is great and definitely welcome to have it back. But the Ceylon Literary and Art Festival is a second one, which was again didn't focus on Gaul because Gaul is already on that literary map. This time they focused on Kandy and Colombo. There's also Mathura for Arts, which was taking place around the same time. Again, a focus on art and the arts in Mathura. And then Kala happening in Colombo, and Kala was showcasing South Asian art as well. So 4 things happening within a span of 4 weeks. I mean, I think, again, for a different kind of client, it looks like we're trying to put Sri Lanka on the map, and I think that's great because it shows the depth of the destination.
So things are looking extremely good, and not just on supply, but on demand as well. So coming in the middle of this is pricing.
Yes.
When we look at, like you said, we have things that make us competitive, but how competitive are we in terms of pricing when we look at other destinations?
See, historically, Sri Lanka has positioned themselves as one of the cheapest countries in Asia. And personally, I'm against that positioning because I think it doesn't do justice to what we have to offer as a country. And as a matter of fact, we are certainly not the cheapest anymore. That doesn't mean that we are overpriced, and I understand why we are not as cheap as we used to be. I mean, our tax structures are such that, you know, a third of what someone pays at a hotel now is service charge or tax, which is a pretty significant portion. Our energy costs are probably one of the highest in the region. So there's reason for our pricing to go up. I still don't think we're overpriced, but I think it's extremely important that we are mindful that we still offer good value. And I think that's where we need to work double as hard. The pricing is okay if we're still delivering great value. And I think if you work on that aspect, I still think we can hold on to these prices.
Building upon your answer, Suranjith, the president has also emphasized this. He has said that at least if we can target more high-spending tourists who spend $500 a day, you know, that will change the game for us. But this is very steep amount. So I want to ask you, is it practical right now, and what are the prospects looking like?
Okay, so I mean, I think any tourist destination should cater to all ends of the market. And I think you see this in mature destinations like Thailand and places like that, where you will have a $10 room and a $1,000 room. And I think the good thing about having that broad spectrum is that you ensure that the benefits of tourism really reach down to the grassroots levels. And I think that's one of the key things that tourism brings to the table, the ability for it to filter down to most people, you know, in the population of Sri Lanka. Now, having said that, I don't think we should be driving a volume strategy as a country because we're a small country and we're already having issues around over-visitation, and that is with, you know, 1.5 million tourists or 2.3 million or 4 million, which we're targeting this year. So if we are to get to the big numbers, we're going to have major issues. So I think we have to shift our strategy from a volume-driven one to a value-driven one. And I agree with the president in terms of saying we should target high-end travelers, but $500 per traveler per day seems extremely steep. And the reason for that is because I can probably count on one hand the number of properties that are there that are charging that value from a tourist at the moment. And the reality is, to get more hotels of that quality in the next year or 2 or 3 years is not possible, because these hotels have to be constructed, and that takes years, and you need to attract those investors who are going to build these hotels. So I feel that's a bit of a stretch, but I think from a principal perspective, I agree that we need to cater to a high-end traveler and ensure that we are driving that as well.
You said something very interesting there, where we are a small country, so if we are struggling with 1.5 million,
Yes.
How can we deal with a bigger number? But there's already a bigger number on the table, because again the country has put a 5 million goal, I think, for 2030.
Yes.
How will that play around?
So I mean, I think 5 million is an achievable number as a country, but we have to reach that, or we have to drive that goal in a very strategic manner. For instance, I spoke about overvisitation. Classic example of overvisitation is Yala, and we've read so many times of the queues of jeeps that are waiting to get into the park, and of course that doesn't offer a great experience to a traveler. I think what we need to do is, as much as Yala is great, there's also lots of other national parks in Sri Lanka. I mean, we have something like 43 nature reserves in Sri Lanka. I mean, for a country of our size, that's phenomenal. So why don't we also do some marketing and awareness creation around the other nature reserves and national parks? Then, whilst that happens, we also need to be granting approval for hotels and accommodation providers to make their way to those national parks. So right now people go to Yala because the best hotels are around Yala. Wilpattu has a few options, but not as much as Yala does. But if we take each national park that we have, from Udavalavey to Galloya to whatever it may be, and we have a strategy behind how we're going to drive travelers to each of those parks, I'm pretty sure we can manage that number without a problem. So I think we need a strategy that's going to really look at the resources we have and say, okay, if you want to get 5 million tourists, what are the new areas that we're going to open up for these travelers? And how are we going to do it in a way that's not going to have over-tourism in any one place? Because that's not going to have give a positive experience for these travelers to come back. And I think if we do that, and I mean, I think we see examples of this kind of thing happening in places like Singapore, where they forecast their demand and then they manage supply accordingly. So Singapore, for instance, will say, okay, this is the kind of growth that we envisage. We want that growth to come in 5-star, 4-star, and 3-star accommodation levels, and then they will grant approval for hotels to get constructed at those levels in the areas that they want the hotels to come up. So I think we might need to follow a similar strategy. I know it's easier for Singapore because it's a smaller country, but if we want to drive a number like this, it's definitely possible, but with some strategy behind it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's time to take a very short break now, but we'll soon be back to talk more about inbound tourism.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Lite 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Lite 87.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Suranjith De Fonseka, the Managing Director of the travel sector of Acorn Group. Suranjith, I'm going to ask you a question from a different angle now. So everything is coming up, travel is bubbling, and this whole post-pandemic travel trends, or the new age traveler, is the buzzword today.
Yes.
How do you see the new age traveler, especially focusing on Gen Z?
Yes. So I think Sri Lanka is the most phenomenal destination for the new age traveler, because a new age traveler is looking for immersive experiences. And not every destination can boast of the plethora of experiences that we can offer. I mean, we're such a melting pot of people. I mean, the experience that a traveler has in the north of Sri Lanka is distinctly different to the experience that they will have in the south of Sri Lanka, and still very different to the experience they might get in the east, because the languages spoken are different, the religions followed are different, the food that is consumed is different. And I think travelers of today are fascinated by this diversity. They're fascinated by the need to have that immersive experience. And I think we naturally lend ourselves to what a traveler is looking for. And so how do Gen Z travelers fit into this whole thing? I think they're probably the biggest advocates of an immersive experience. They are not interested in lying on a beach for 14 days like the baby boomers used to be, for instance. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to really feel the destination. And I think that's where Sri Lanka has something amazing to offer. And I think because of that, we're even seeing, I mean, I told you we're an inbound travel company. And one would think that Gen Z travelers are happy to be independent travelers and do it themselves and not use the services of an inbound travel company like ours. But what we're seeing is, yes, as much as there are independent Gen Z travelers, there's also quite a few of them who use services of organizations like ours, and that is because of their need for these immersive experiences. What we can provide are bespoke experiences that they can't find online, which really helps them get a good feel for the country. And I think that's a shift that we are seeing in the recent years. Also, I believe the pandemic helped organizations like ours, because independent travelers realized that they were on their own. And the risk involved with that, because there is a lot of money that they're putting down, and it's always good to be able to talk to someone when something goes wrong. And you know, we live in a world where lots of things can happen, and that's where we can offer them offer travelers the support that they need to handhold them through the process of planning and booking their holiday, as well as ensuring that what's planned and booked is actually delivered.
You said that Gen Z are probably the biggest advocates of experiences. Talking of you know, branding and marketing.
Yes.
How should Sri Lanka be an advocate for itself? I mean, I know the travel sector in general is asking the government for a lot of support here in terms of branding, in terms of marketing,
yes,
a worldwide slogan, a campaign.
Yes.
How are things faring in that angle?
The sad reality is that we've not had a proper marketing campaign since the war ended. And Ruwandi, that's 15 years since the war ended. I know there was a recent talk and approval of a campaign which was supposed to take off ground around now. I'm not sure whether it has, but I believe either way it's much needed. And I think that's what we have to ensure happens, because most countries around the world understand the value of tourism, and they understand how it can positively impact their respective economies. And as a result, they're putting a lot of marketing money down to promote their respective destinations. So if we are not seen, we're going to get left out when travelers are going to consider where to go on holiday next. I think we're seeing today, despite the cost of travel escalating in the most ridiculous manner post-pandemic, that people are still traveling. And this is happening globally. And I think it's just the need that people have to discover new places, to shut off, to have new experiences, that's driving that. And I think despite talks of global recessions and risks associated with travel, with two global conflicts taking place,
Yes.
People are still traveling. And I think that is great. It's a great space for us to be in. But I think we have to understand that we're competing with the rest of the world. And I think we need to make people aware and understand that Sri Lanka's out there and is waiting to get explored.
Suranjith, we were talking a lot about leisure travelers, I think all this time. I also want to ask you a question about the MICE segment, the business segment. How is that faring? Have the numbers come up?
Well, for business travelers, the numbers have come up, Ruwandi, and I think it's because if the country is stable, which I believe we've reached some degree of stability in the last year or so, business travelers will come for business needs that they have to fulfill. And whether there is minimum rates or not, that need to travel, if it exists, they will travel. And I believe the city hotels have been seeing that business. Now, MICE is quite different. For MICE, you're talking about group travel, and you're talking about planning that takes place months and years in advance at times. And I think we haven't seen that come back yet, partly because when MICE travel was beginning to pick up post-pandemic, we had our own economic crisis here. So we were not on the radar for quite a few of those international MICE travelers to pick Sri Lanka. And just when the economic situation was getting better, we have a minimum rate that has been applied on the city hotels. And most MICE travelers, except for the I part, which are the incentive travelers, all other MICE travelers will probably pick Colombo. And Colombo's competing with a global audience in terms of, competitiveness. And with our minimum rates, we may not be as competitive as some of our neighboring countries. And so as a result, I think on the MICE side, we've seen some impact, but I would say business travelers are back.
Good news all around.
Yeah, indeed.
We're almost at the end of our conversation, Suranjith, but I want to ask you something that is aligned to one of LMD's own campaigns. So we have a campaign called Refresh Sri Lanka, which we launched to create a more civic-minded society by raising awareness. Now, talking about civic-mindedness, you mentioned something at the beginning of our conversation that tourism essentially should go down to the grassroots level so that everyone will benefit. So when we're looking at increasing our value and our volumes, going towards 2030, in all this planning and goals, where does the community stand and how can we ensure that there's civic-mindedness, that it's always on the agenda?
Ruwandi, I think we need to first have a campaign internally for all Sri Lankans and make them understand the benefits of tourism and how it can impact them. Again, I come back to Singapore because Singapore probably spent more money a few years ago on a domestic campaign to educate Singaporeans about the value of tourism and the need for Singapore to be a safe place for these tourists and things like that. Because they felt if they're going to attract these tourists and they're going to say, hey, Singapore's the safest place to come to, they need to be able to deliver on that. And I think it's important that we ensure that Sri Lankans see the value of tourism. I mean, the biggest challenge that we're having now is that there are many who, of course, for obvious reasons, had their income negatively impacted in the last couple of years, are now seeing tourists and they just want to rip them off. The taxi drivers who want to charge 10,000 rupees to go a distance that would usually cost only 500 rupees, that kind of thing takes place. And of course, you're going to end up with tourists who have a bitter taste in their mouth and not want to come back because you have this constant feeling that someone's trying to rip you off. And we need to educate these people. We need to ensure that the people of this country understand that as responsible citizens, that this industry is needed for this country. And you can't rip people off because word of that gets around. We are living in a country, in a world where everyone is connected. Yes. And they just post a negative experience online and hundreds and thousands of other people will see that and will decide whether to come to Sri Lanka or not based on what they've read. I mean, similarly, there's a lot that we can do around sustainability and conservation. See, a lot of travelers are coming to Sri Lanka for its natural beauty. So if we don't prioritize conservation, we're not going to be left with amazing natural beauty for people to come and experience. And I think these are things, I'm glad that LMD is doing this campaign. I think it's important that we fully understand and support that, because tourism is just one of those industries where the education has to begin at home. And when it does, I'm 100% sure that the travelers who come to this country will have a great experience.
Suranjith, it's been a very insightful and delightful conversation. Before we let you go, are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
If there's one industry that can really differentiate Sri Lanka, I believe it's tourism. I mean, and that's probably one of the reasons I've stuck to this industry, despite all the turbulence that it had to endure. I mean, and we've had to endure from tsunamis to wars and, crisis after crisis. But despite all of that, we've been a resilient industry that's always bounced back. And I think the reason for that is that the product that we have is second to none. It's absolutely fantastic. And I think if we believe in that product and that product Sri Lanka, I'm pretty sure that these goals of 5 million tourists and $500 tourists and all of that can be achieved. We need the right strategy behind it. We need the right actions to back it, because the product we have is outstanding. So that's my concluding thoughts. I'd like to request those who are considering on whether they should start a career in tourism to really come on board, because there are, most other industries can have challenges that may come their way, and of course, similarly, tourism has had their fair share of challenges. But the product we have as a country is amazing. And if you're passionate about travel and you're proud of what Sri Lanka has to offer, then you need to be a part of this industry.
I think everyone has to be a part of it, like you said.
Yeah, indeed.
Unified goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruwandi.
We've been talking with the Managing Director of the Travel Sector of Acorn Group, Suranjith De Fonseka. Suranjith, it was very nice to have you on the show, and thank you for a delightful conversation.
Thanks, Ruwandi.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, take care.